On a quiet
Oh
evening inside
my
Buckingham Palace,
God.
something felt wrong. A staff member walked toward a private exit calm, unhurried, until a royal guard stepped into their path. No alarms. No shouting. Just a single question that stopped everything. What followed was not a chase or a scandal, but a moment of razor-sharp instinct that protected one of Queen Elizabeth II's most priceless personal treasures. How did a single guard sense danger where no one else did? And why did this moment quietly redefine loyalty inside the palace walls? If you enjoy true royal stories filled with quiet courage, hidden tension, and moments history almost lost, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves royal mysteries. Your support helps keep these untold stories alive, and trust me, this one only gets more gripping from here. There are moments in history that arrive loudly sirens, headlines, flashing cameras. And then there are moments that arrive quietly. So quietly, in fact, that only one person notices. This story begins on an evening that looked, on the surface, entirely ordinary inside Buckingham Palace. The corridors were calm. The marble floors reflected soft yellow light from chandeliers that had illuminated centuries of footsteps. Staff members moved with practiced ease, some finishing shifts, others preparing for the night routine. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt unusual. And that was precisely why the royal guard noticed. He had stood at his post for hours, spine straight, expression neutral, eyes forward. To most people, royal guards appear almost ceremonial symbols of tradition frozen in time. But behind the stillness is something else entirely. Relentless awareness. These men and women are trained not just to watch, but to sense. To read silence. To notice patterns others dismiss. That evening, one staff member walked toward a lesser-used exit. Not running, not hiding, just walking. But something was off. The guard couldn't have explained it immediately. There was no obvious rule being broken. The staff member had clearance. The uniform was correct. The pace was unhurried. And yet, the timing didn't align with routine. Why leave through that corridor now? Royal security operates on rhythm. Shifts overlap. Routes repeat. Movements become predictable. And predictability, ironically, is what makes disruption visible. This exit was rarely used at that hour, especially not by someone from that department. The guard's eyes followed the staff member for only a second longer than usual. That was all it took. He noticed the way the individual's arm stayed close to their side, the way their posture stiffened slightly when they realized they were being observed, the way their gaze flicked not forward but sideways, calculating distance. Tiny details, easy to ignore, impossible to forget once noticed. In that instant, training overpowered hesitation. The guard stepped forward, not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough to enter the staff member's line of sight. "Evening," he said calmly. "May I see your pass again?" It was a routine request, the kind asked dozens of times a day, but the reaction wasn't routine. The staff member paused, just for a fraction of a second, too brief for panic, too long for comfort. They handed over the pass. Everything on it checked out. Name, department, authorization. Perfect. And yet the guard didn't step aside. He glanced subtly at the staff member's coat, palace issued, slightly heavier than usual for the season, buttoned all the way up. "What brings you through this corridor tonight?" he asked, voice even.
The question was polite, but the silence that followed was not. "Oh, just finishing late," the staff member replied. A smile followed, friendly, almost convincing. Almost. Royal guards are taught something early in their careers. Real confidence doesn't rush to explain itself. And this answer felt rehearsed, too smooth, as if prepared in advance. The guard nodded slowly. "Understood," he said, then gently added, "Would you mind waiting one moment?" That was when the temperature of the moment changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but something shifted. The staff member's shoulders tightened. The smile faded just slightly. The coat sleeve moved, barely, revealing the edge of something hard beneath the fabric. The guard didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply raised his hand. A signal. Another guard, stationed further down the corridor, looked over and immediately understood. Years of working together had taught them to read movements, not words. Within seconds, the corridor was no longer empty, but it was still quiet. That quiet mattered, because inside Buckingham Palace, silence is often intentional. It prevents panic. It preserves dignity. It keeps situations from becoming stories before they need to be. "Sir," the guard said gently but firmly, "for security reasons, we'll need to conduct a brief check." The staff member hesitated, and hesitation, in a place like this, speaks volumes. I've never had to do this before," they said. "And I hope you won't again," the guard replied. "But tonight we need to." Reluctantly, the staff member unbuttoned the coat. What emerged wasn't large. It wasn't flashy, but it made both guards go very still. Wrapped carefully in cloth, protected, almost reverently, was a brooch. Not just any brooch. Even without its full reveal, its craftsmanship was unmistakable. The design carried a quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need explanation because it has already been seen by history. This was not jewelry meant to leave the palace. This was something deeply personal, something belonging to the queen herself. At that moment, the corridor felt heavier, as if the walls were listening. The guard didn't react outwardly. No gasp, no accusation. He simply said, "Please remain here." Backup was summoned discreetly. Palace security protocols moved into place with the efficiency of a system refined over decades. The staff member said nothing now. No excuses. No protests. Because the truth had already spoken for them. What made this moment remarkable wasn't the interception itself. It was how close it came to never happening at all. If the guard had looked away, if he had dismissed his instinct, if he had chosen routine over intuition, history would have lost something irreplaceable. Later, when questioned about it, the guard would say something simple. "I just did my job." But those words hide a deeper truth, because his job wasn't just to stand still. It was to notice, to protect not only a person, but a legacy. And as the brooch was carefully secured and returned to its rightful place, few beyond palace walls ever learned how close it came to disappearing forever. Yet this moment would quietly ripple through the royal household, reshaping protocols, trust, and the silent understanding of what loyalty truly means. But to understand why this object mattered so deeply, why its loss would have cut far deeper than monetary value, we need to talk about the brooch itself. To understand why the moment in that quiet corridor mattered so deeply, you first have to understand the object itself. Because what was nearly taken from Buckingham Palace that evening wasn't simply a piece of jewelry. It was a fragment of memory, a symbol of continuity, a private echo of a queen's inner world. Queen Elizabeth II was never known for extravagance. Her wardrobe followed familiar lines, dependable colors, and timeless silhouettes. But her brooches? Those were different. They spoke when she did not. They carried messages, emotions, and sometimes history itself. This particular brooch was among her most cherished. It wasn't the largest. It wasn't the most valuable in terms of raw gemstones. But its significance rested in something far more powerful: association. The brooch had been worn at moments that mattered, moments of grief, resolve, unity, and quiet strength. Those close to the queen understood this. And those who worked around her long enough began to notice patterns. When she wore this brooch, it meant something. It had first entered her life decades earlier, gifted privately within the royal family, not announced, not photographed for headlines. It was given during a period of transition, a moment when the weight of the crown was becoming heavier and the world around Britain felt uncertain. The design was elegant but restrained, a cluster of diamonds arranged around a deep central stone, cut in a way that caught light gently rather than aggressively. It was designed to be noticed, but never to shout. Much like the queen herself, she wore it during private family gatherings, during meetings that never appeared in official records, during moments when public confidence had to be projected, even if private doubts existed behind palace walls. To the public, it was just another brooch. To the Queen, it was armor. Former royal aides have often spoken about how Queen Elizabeth used jewelry as quiet communication. When words were limited by protocol, her choice of brooch could say more than any speech. Diplomats noticed. World leaders noticed. Even the press eventually began to speculate. But this brooch remained mostly out of that spotlight. It was worn sparingly, deliberately, which made its presence outside her personal collection not just unusual, but alarming, because objects like this are not handled casually. Royal jewelry is cataloged, secured, logged, especially items belonging personally to the monarch. There are protocols layered on top of protocols. Every movement is documented, every transfer witnessed. So, how did it end up concealed beneath a staff member's coat? That question echoed to the palace long after the immediate incident had passed. What made the brooch even more sensitive was its emotional timing. The Queen had worn it recently, during a period when her public appearances had grown fewer, but more symbolically charged. Observers noted her choices carefully then. Every detail mattered. This brooch, in particular, had been pinned close to her heart, and those who had worked with her long enough understood why. It reminded her of stability, of promises kept, of a time when duty was first accepted, not yet burdened by decades of expectation. It connected the young woman she once was to the monarch she became. In a life lived constantly under observation, this brooch belonged to her alone. That is why the idea of it leaving the palace, without permission, without record, felt like a violation far beyond theft. It wasn't about money. It was about trust. Royal households function on an unspoken agreement. Loyalty flows both ways. Staff are given extraordinary access, and in return, discretion and integrity are expected absolutely. That trust is sacred, and once questioned, it ripples outward. Security officials revisited movement logs. Inventory systems were reviewed line by line. Quiet interviews took place behind closed doors. No accusations were made publicly. No names released. The palace doesn't operate on spectacle. It operates on containment. What few outside ever realized was how close the brooch came becoming something else entirely. An artifact sold privately, a rumor whispered among collectors, a story distorted by distance and time. Because royal items, once removed from context, lose their meaning. They become objects instead of symbols. And Queen Elizabeth understood symbols better than anyone. She once remarked, privately, that the crown was not worn on the head, but carried in the heart. Objects like this brooch were reminders of that truth, tangible anchors in a role that demanded emotional restraint and endless composure. The thought of losing such an anchor was deeply unsettling. And yet, what followed the interception wasn't anger. It was reflection. Palace procedures were quietly strengthened, access routes adjusted, oversight refined, not out of panic, but out of respect. Respect for the reality that even the most trusted systems require human vigilance. And that brought attention back to the guard, the one who noticed, the one who trusted instinct over routine. In private, senior officials acknowledged what could have been lost. Not just a brooch, but a piece of living history, a silent witness to reign-defining moments. The Queen herself was informed, carefully, without drama. Those who were present say she listened, nodded once, and then said something quietly profound. Then I'm glad someone was paying attention. No reprimand, no outrage, just gratitude. Because in the end, the story of that brooch isn't about an attempted theft. It's about what it represents when someone chooses duty, without recognition, without hesitation. And the next chapter of this story unfolds not in a grand lesson or public statement, but in a silent confrontation that never made the news. One that proved just how powerful calm authority can be when everything is at stake. What makes Buckingham Palace so unique isn't only its grandeur, it's its discipline. Moments of crisis don't explode here, they compress. After the brooch was revealed, there was no shouting, no dramatic escalation, no hurried footsteps echoing down the corridor. Everything unfolded in a measured, almost unsettling calm. as if the palace itself knew how to hold its breath. The staff member stood still, hands visible, eyes lowered. Two royal guards remained positioned at equal distance, close enough to intervene, far enough to avoid provocation. Their posture said one thing clearly: this is under control. That calm was deliberate. Royal security training emphasizes something many people never consider. Panic attracts attention. Attention creates rumors. Rumors damage institutions. Inside the palace, discretion is not politeness. It is protection. The guard who first intervened spoke again, his tone unchanged. "For everyone's sake," he said quietly, "we're going to walk back together." It wasn't phrased as a command. It didn't need to be. The staff member nodded and complied. As they moved, the corridor seemed longer than before. Every step echoed softly, as though the walls themselves were recording the moment. Other staff passed by, offering polite nods, unaware that history had almost slipped past them in silence. No one stared. No one asked questions. That's how containment works. They were guided into a small antechamber, a functional space, unadorned, far from public rooms. Inside, another officer was already waiting. No phones, no paperwork in sight, just people trained to handle moments without turning them into spectacles. The brooch was carefully removed, still wrapped. It was placed on the table between them, like an unspoken truth. For a moment, no one said anything. Silence, when used correctly, has weight. Finally, the officer asked a single question. "Can you explain how this came into your possession?" The staff member hesitated. This time, there was no smile. The explanation that followed wasn't dramatic. There were no grand motives, no elaborate plot, just a familiar human failing. Opportunity meeting poor judgment, access mistaken for entitlement, a belief that something small, something quiet, could slip through unnoticed. But in a place built on noticing, that belief collapses quickly. As the conversation continued, it became clear this wasn't part of a wider breach. There was no network, no accomplice, no hidden route, just one individual who underestimated the system and overestimated themselves. And that distinction mattered, because the palace responds differently to threats than to failures. This was not treated as treason. It was treated as a breach of trust. The brooch, meanwhile, never left the room. It was returned immediately to secure custody, logged, verified, and sealed with the same care it had always received. For the object itself, the disruption was brief. For the people involved, the consequences were lasting. The staff member was suspended quietly, removed from duty without announcement. No press release, no public shaming. The royal household has long believed that dignity should extend even to discipline. What followed next was perhaps the most telling part of the story. The guard. He was asked to give a report, not because anyone doubted him, but because details matter. He described the moment he noticed something off. The slight delay, the unnatural posture, the choice of exit. When asked how he knew to intervene, he paused. "I didn't know," he said. "I felt it." That answer could have been dismissed. Instead, it was noted, because the palace understands something many modern institutions forget. Systems don't replace instincts. They depend on them. In the days that followed, security briefings subtly shifted. Guards were reminded, not instructed, but reminded to trust their observations, to question without fear of embarrassment, to understand that politeness should never override protection. No one used the brooch incident as an example. They didn't need to. Word travels quietly in places like this. And then there was the queen. She did not summon the guard immediately. There was no ceremonial acknowledgement, no formal commendation. For weeks, nothing happened. Until one afternoon, the guard was informed politely that he was to attend a brief audience. Nothing in his training fully prepares you for that. The room was smaller than expected. The queen sat composed, as always. No crown, no spectacle, just presence. She thanked him, not elaborately, not emotionally, simply, sincerely. And then she said something that stayed with him long after. "You protected more than an object," she told him. "You protected continuity." That word, continuity, matters deeply in the monarchy. It is the invisible thread that connects past, present, and future. And in that moment, the guard understood that what he had done wasn't about rules. It was about stewardship. The palace resumed its rhythm. Corridors filled again. Routines normalized. From the outside, nothing had changed. But internally, something had shifted. Because one quiet confrontation had proven a powerful truth. Loyalty isn't loud. Duty doesn't demand applause. And the most important moments often happen when no one is watching. Yet the impact of that evening didn't end there. It raised a question that lingered long after the corridor fell silent. What does true service really look like in a modern monarchy? The answer lies not in the brooch, not even in the guard, but in what this moment revealed about the future of royal duty itself. When stories like this surface, quietly, years later, they don't linger because of what almost happened. They linger because of what they reveal. And this moment inside Buckingham Palace revealed something deeply important about royal duty in a modern world. At first glance, the incident seemed small. No headlines, no public disruption, no visible consequences beyond palace walls. But inside the royal household, it sparked reflection, because institutions built on tradition survive only when those traditions are actively protected, not assumed. Queen Elizabeth II understood this better than anyone. She ruled through constancy, through repetition, through showing up again and again, even when the world shifted beneath her feet. And the monarchy she preserved wasn't sustained by spectacle, but by systems, many of them invisible. One of those systems is trust. Royal staff are not just employees. They are custodians. They move through private spaces, witness private moments, and handle objects that carry generations of meaning. That access isn't earned once. It's reaffirmed every day. The brooch incident became a reminder that trust must be renewed, not inherited. In the weeks that followed, internal discussions focused less on punishment and more on prevention. Access protocols were refined, exit routes reassessed, inventory procedures quietly strengthened, not out of fear, but out of respect for what was being protected. And then there was the broader lesson. This wasn't about catching wrongdoing. It was about noticing responsibility. The guard didn't act because a rule was broken. He acted because something didn't feel right. And that distinction mattered deeply. It signaled a form of service rooted not in authority, but in care. That mindset, quiet vigilance, emotional intelligence, discipline restraint, is increasingly rare. And yet, it is exactly what the monarchy relies upon. In many ways, this moment reflected a generational shift. The monarchy of Queen Elizabeth's later years, and the one now carried forward by Prince William, places greater emphasis on values over hierarchy, on awareness over ceremony. Prince William has often spoken about modernizing the monarchy without stripping it of meaning. Stories like this help explain what that really looks like in practice. Not grand reforms, but everyday excellence. Not public gestures, but private standards. The guard never sought recognition. He didn't give interviews. He didn't tell the story. He returned to his post the next day and did exactly what he'd always done. That, too, is royal service. And perhaps that's why the Queen's response was so telling. She didn't elevate the moment into drama. She acknowledged it quietly, because quiet acknowledgement carries weight in institutions built on continuity. What does it mean to protect continuity? It means understanding that objects carry memory, that roles carry responsibility, that tradition survives not because it is old, but because people choose to uphold it. This single act of attention prevented more than the loss of a brooch. It preserved confidence, inside the palace and beyond it, confidence that even in a world obsessed with noise, there are still places where silence is guarded with purpose. Today, as the royal family navigates a changing public landscape, this story feels especially relevant. Trust is harder to earn. Scrutiny is constant. Expectations are higher than ever. And yet, the foundation remains the same. People doing their jobs well. People noticing. People choosing integrity when no one is watching. That is the monarchy Queen Elizabeth left behind. And it is the monarchy Prince William continues to shape, not through headlines, but through moments like this, moments that never asked to be remembered, but deserve to be, Because in the end, the most powerful form of loyalty is not loyalty that is seen. It is loyalty that stands quietly in a corridor, notices something slightly wrong, and chooses, without hesitation, to do what is right.